So, good afternoon everyone. Now, where did we stop the last time? Industrialization policy. So, we had written about the industrialization policy and I was talking to you about the drain of wealth. Right. Now, a few facts here are important and please pay some amount of attention today because what we're going to do to begin with is not too conceptual from here on, but is important. Especially what we're going to talk about today, the economic policy is almost finished, okay, barely one or two things more. And after that we'll talk about the वो जो आप सब जानना चाहते हैं क्या, गवर्नर जनरल, लॉ, आर्मी, पुलिस रिफॉर्म्स, पुलिसिंग स्ट्रक्चर, वो सारी चीज़ें they are important and you should know what things to focus on there. They are important. There's not much to understand, but broadly from your prelims point of view especially, some of these things are important. We'll also talk about today the education policy of the British. अरे मैं बहुत सालों से पढ़ा रहा हूँ कि किसी उम्मीद में कि सवाल आएगा किसी दिन. So this year there was, see we also hope, हमारे जीवन की ये होप रहती है आपसे ज़्यादा कि जो हम पढ़ाएं उसमें से कुछ आए इन द एग्ज़ाम. हाँ हाँ सी मेरे जीवन में मैंने इतनी पढ़ाई कर ली है कि आप मुझको कुछ भी पढ़ाने के लिए बोलेंगे, आई कैन डू इट विद अ डिसेंट अमाउंट ऑफ कॉम्पिटेंस. मुझे सबसे पहले मैंने जीवन में MBBS किया है ना, फिर मैंने MBBS करने के बाद MA किया. तो लोगों ने बोलते हैं MBBS के बाद MA क्यों कर रहे हो? मैंने बोला कि कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है मेरे जीवन में. My parents don't ask me what you want to do anymore in life because they have given up on me long back. So this is freedom, right? And then you can have freedom to do anything. There are masters, then MPhil, then PhD. तो मैंने public policy, political science, IR, history, इतना तो मैंने पढ़ ही लिया. उसके बाद medical science भी पढ़ लिया. तो डॉक्टरी की 2-4 दवाइयाँ भी लिख देता हूँ. So आप बोले तो सरोगेसी लॉ, बायोलॉजी भी पढ़ा देता हूँ मैं आपको. That is not relevant from UPSC point of view. Now, basically what we are doing today, this is important also from your examination point of view because education policy पे उन्होंने 1-2 question पूछा इस बार, right? For schools which were being opened, etc. But they've asked a few questions in the past and they can ask some questions from here in mains also, okay? And that is about the Orientalist Angelicist debate and things around it. So, let's first talk about the period, the few things, factual things that are left here. Drain of wealth का हमने आपको बात किया. That, and let me just explain drain of wealth, a few facts around it. Some of them have been asked in the prelims examination, and then we'll go to discuss the structure of judiciary under British India, the structure of army, the structure of police, the structure of civil services, and then those things, the charter acts, regulating acts, the key facts that you need to remember. Also, there is no limit to facts. You may always come across a few more facts than what I am teaching in the class. Your aim should be that at least what we are doing in the class, that many facts you remember. Over and above this, if you can, well and good. If you can't, then also it's okay. Now, firstly, let's focus upon the drain of wealth idea. Now, in the drain of wealth idea basically is reflective of the fact something that had been emphasized time and again by a number of economic nationalists. Okay? And these economic nationalists were people like Dadabhai Naoroji, were people like G. Subramaniam Iyer, and were people like Dadabhai Naroji, were people like G. Subramaniam Iyer, and were people like R.C. Dutt. Now, Dadabhai Naroji wrote the book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. Please write these names down. Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. This book was written by Dadabhai Naroji. Ramesh Chandra Dutt wrote the book Economic History of India. Ramesh Chandra Dutt wrote the book, R.C. Dutt wrote the book Economic History of India. And one of the things, what is important for you to is not just mug up the name of the book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, but what is Dadabhai Naroji trying to say? Dadabhai Naroji is one of those individuals, every organization formed by him, every organization he was a part of, newspaper, social reform, kuch bhi, you need to know. Okay? So you don't need to remember the name of every individual, but some key individuals you need to know everything about. Naroji is considered one of the early Indian nationalists, and every organization that he was a part of, you must have some idea about. Okay. Now, in the sense that Naroji, if you have written these names, written? No, not written. Okay. So firstly, what is Naroji arguing is that what is this drain of wealth? He is saying that basically, contrary to British opinion, British said that the British are ruling India. Why? To bring civilization to the Indian masses, to civilize them, to make them well behaved, to educate them, to bring civilization to them. Rather, and so British argued that Indians are what? Uncivilized. That is why they require civilization. And who will bring them civilization? The civilized. Who are civilized? The white man, the British. And so they said that this is the white man's burden. They have come to India not to exploit Indians. Rather, they have come to India to bring them civilization. And that is what they said. We are not coming out of any enthusiasm, or we are not gaining anything. Rather, we are taking the burden of civilizing the barbaric, the uncivilized Indian masses. This is the white man's burden. Now, the early economic nationalists like Naroji, like others, are trying to refute these ideas, arguing that rather than doing any of it, they are primarily here for economically exploiting the Indians or the Indian economy in general. But it is one thing to say that Angrez chor hain, but it is another thing to actually conceptually or through rigorous economic analysis prove how our policy is affecting and what is the impact. This is what is being done by them. See, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो, ये बोलना बहुत आसान है. If Indian nationalism was merely to demand the overthrow of British rule, this was relatively the easy part. But why must be the British removed? This also needs to be equally understood and explored, because unless and until you point out what is the problem with British rule, how can you correct it? Who is doing that analysis is a number of these economic historians and economic nationalists actually at this point of time. Dadabhai Naroji is one of the important ones amongst them. Naroji himself was a Parsi individual, a relatively wealthy Parsi individual who spent a considerable amount of time in India as well as in London. Okay. And he spent a considerable amount of time in India as well as in London. He wrote a number of articles in the British newspapers. He approached a number of British parliamentarians, arguing that they should understand that the British rule is actually the reason for poverty and is the reason for unemployment amongst Indians. Rather than being a source of positive rule, the British rule is the source of exploitation of the Indian masses. He is trying to generate a public opinion in Britain and also British parliamentarians which understands the plight of Indians. He is saying that the British rule treats the British citizens differently than it treats the Indian citizens, because the British rule in India is actually leading to poverty of Indians. And what he says, that the British rule is very un-British. Un-British in the sense that in Britain, probably the government cares about the welfare of its citizens, but the British rule in India does not do so. So British followed two standards. One standards for British citizens, the other standards for the Indian subjects. And that is why the rule of British in India is very unlike the rule in Britain. That is why he is saying un-British rule, and this un-British rule is responsible for poverty. Okay. If you remember this much, you will never forget. And also, so drain of wealth is trying to bring out the mechanisms through which what is happening. The mechanisms through which there is the drain of resources from India. Now we have discussed most of these things already. For example, the trade policy. We had discussed that how the adoption of trade policy, a unilateral free trade mechanism, or converting India into a market for British goods is adversely affecting Indians, is resulting in a balance of trade in whose favor? British. The result is what? That gold is now going out of India. So that is something, the trade policy, the imposition of one-sided free trade has a negative effect on Indians, not just by taking gold out of India, but also causing deindustrialization in India, right? So this, he says, is responsible for poverty and unemployment in India. Apart from this, he says that not just, this is not the only route of drain of wealth. The other route of drain of wealth is what? The investment, right? We had talked about British investments coming to India. The British investments coming to India. And with the British investments coming to India, the British setting up their investment British setting up, the British capitalist class setting up their industries in India actually exploited, apart from other things, cheap labor, cheap resources, wo koi baat nahi. But even if that is being exploited, another problem is what? That the profits were left largely untaxed. And this constituted another major route of drain of wealth through India, right? And the profits were left largely untaxed. The Indian government could not tax them. And apart from this, the trade policy, the British investments, there is also the expenditure pattern of the British. Because, and this is something that I am telling you now, the expenditure pattern of the British was such that they spent a huge amount of revenue generated from India on two things: the maintenance of the British army, and also one more thing, and that is salaries of the civil servants of the British East India Company officials in India. So much so that the salaries and of salaries as well as pensions. So much so that the salaries and pensions itself costed somewhere around 3% of the GDP, which is a huge amount of money. Okay, and basically huge salaries and pensions were drawn by East India officials, often from the revenue of the British Indian state, so much so that the salaries in East India Company were the highest in the world at that point of time. So basically not just the investment policies, the trade policies, but also the expenditure pattern. Maintenance of the British army was not just crucial for maintenance of British control in the region, but even beyond the region. The British Indian army would be deployed in other areas also. So all of this basically constitutes the drain of wealth. Now, why is this analysis important? Sir, drain of wealth ho raha hai. It really, why should we get into the details of how the drain of wealth is happening? Because when India attains true independence, the overthrow of British, all these things must be addressed. Now, when you will study economy, or if you have studied a basic of economy anywhere, you would know, if you studied a basic of economy anywhere, you would know what? That India adopted after independence what? It changed its trade policy. It, rather than allowing a free entry of imports, restricted imports drastically. Right? We followed a imports, देखिए अभी नहीं भी पता तो कोई बात नहीं, वैसे भी आप पढ़ेंगे तो आपको लेकिन लिंक बता रहा हूँ क्योंकि लिंक कोई नहीं पढ़ाएगा. That is the import substitution policy, to substitute imports and decrease our reliance on imports, because we were being flooded with imports. And being flooded with imports, does it help Indian industries? No. So that is why they talked about restricting entry of imports, and we adopted an import substitution policy, which was one of the reasons, not the only reason. Okay. British investments. Dadabhai Naoroji said, India can never be truly free unless and until it is free of British rule as well as British investments. Why? Because as long as British investments are there, the British government will not give up the control of India, because the primary objective of the British rule is to secure a political climate for British investments in the region. If you want the complete overthrow of British, you don't just have to overthrow British rule, you also have to overthrow British investments, because otherwise they will try to control the policy of the state. So, self-government to कहना बहुत आसान है. What will the government do? The government will adopt these policies. So, the government, I'll give you time to ask questions. Wait, just understand first. So, the government basically will adopt what kind of policies government must adopt is getting determined here. Partly, not completely, obviously, but partly. These are the concerns which must be addressed by any new government. That is why when we started an when we started an industrialization policy, it was partly on a state-led pattern of industrialization, more importantly to keep foreign investments largely out. Foreign investors were kept largely out. In fact, a large number of foreign industries were either shut down or were nationalized. And most of the industries were either run by states or basically Indian, or some small sectors were open to private Indian capitalist class. Okay. बस एक broad है, आपको पता होना चाहिए. एक state-led pattern of industrialization था इंडिया में, and in that state-led pattern of industrialization, heavy industries were owned by the state, and other smaller sectors of the economy were open to Indian private players, not the British. So our policy from 1945 till 1990 was not to attract FDI, was rather to keep them out from as many regions as many sectors as possible. Okay. So a part of that is getting driven from all these concerns. So the drain of wealth theory is इसीलिए important है, because this is leading to the birth of, this is partly contributing to the birth of secular nationalism. It is important to overthrow the British, yes. The British are the source of backwardness of Indians, yes. But how exactly? They are doing this analysis. And this analysis has got nothing to do with religion, has nothing to do with culture. So this is nationalism which demands the overthrow of British, not invoking any cultural or religious symbols. कि भारत हमारी माता है, उसको ये हो गया है, वो हो गया है, ऐसा कुछ नहीं. They are doing all that they're doing is economic analysis, not invoking any cultural or religious symbols. This is what is secular nationalism. They are amongst the early secular Indian nationalists. Okay. So is that point clear? Just write one more para and we'll end this topic. Okay. They'd ask the question once in prelims examination that who amongst the following were the early economic nationalists, and they had given all the three as the options, and then you had to pick 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. All the three are the early ones. Now, so you can write down, firstly, so we had written till drain of wealth, right? Right. Now, write the next para. The drain of wealth theory by Dadabhai Naoroji emphasized that the British rule in India was a source of poverty and exploitation of the Indian masses. He argued he argued for a reform. He argued for a reform rather than overthrow of British rule. अब आपको मैंने एक लाइन लिखवाई है, ये इंपॉर्टेंट लाइन है. That Naroji is not saying कि भाई British rule is a source of problems, so it must be overthrown. He is saying reform your policies. Why is he not saying about overthrow of British rule? Because in 1861 the law is introduced, that is the law on sedition. You talk about overthrow of British rule, you will go to jail. And Naroji doesn't want to go to jail, right, on charges of sedition. Right. So they are not talking about an overthrow of the British rule, they are talking about the reform of British rule. Right. So I made one video 4 years ago on sedition only. वो आज भी वैसे ही है, वो आज भी उतना ही relevant है, वो आज भी YouTube पे. So basically that is there. Now तब नाम कोई और थे 4 साल पहले, आज नाम कुछ और है, लेकिन नाम issue वही है. Okay. Now like write down. Under the drain of wealth theory, Naroji argued that British trade policy led to deindustrialization. The British trade policy led to deindustrialization in India. Its investment policies allowed untaxed profits of British capitalist class to be derived from the region moreover a heavy state expenditure on the British Army, and the salaries and pensions of civil servants all constituted major streams of drain of wealth. Clear? Ab next topic we are talking about is, firstly, the next topic that we are talking about, and इस topic में मैं कोई dictate नहीं करूँगा, इसमें आपको जो लिखना है मेरे साथ लिखिए, and there will be a PowerPoint presentation, okay? Because this is factual. एक limit के बाद facts लिखवाने के लिए नहीं है class. It is to come to analysis more rather than just dictating notes and reduce it to a note making exercise. Because there's not much to understand here. Just you should know which major points to focus on. Now, firstly, I'll talk about the civil services structure. देखिए, एक चीज याद रखिए, if you don't know, I'm going to talk about many governor generals here. So the approach is not to pick up one governor general and the other. ऐसे नहीं. Rather, we focus upon in which area what major changes were introduced and who introduced them. So rather than focusing ki, okay, Warren Hastings did these many things or Cornwallis did these many things, we don't do it like this. We'll do it the opposite way. That in civil services, these changes were introduced by Cornwallis. In army, these changes were there. In judicial structure, these changes were introduced by, say, Warren Hastings, by other institutions, by other individuals. That is the approach. Why? Because that is how you should remember. If you try to remember this way, that Cornwallis did all these things, you'll have to simply mug them up. It's not a very good idea. You can always write all of them in one place. That is later. But understand them and remember them sector wise. देखिए, जहां भी आपको ना याद आए, answer is Cornwallis. Okay, why? Because Cornwallis was responsible for establishing some of the initial administrative structures in India. Broadly, एक दो चीजें याद रख लीजिए कि सबसे पहले you see actually who is becoming the Governor General is Warren Hastings. Okay. And the Governor General एकदम से कहाँ से आ गया? We'll talk about regulating acts, charter acts separately. वहाँ पे मैं explain कर दूँगा. अभी आप याद रख लीजिए. First Governor General, okay, is Warren Hastings. Now, Warren Hastings is there till 1785. After Hastings comes who? Cornwallis. Cornwallis is there till 93. और भी लोग आते हैं, लेकिन हमें जिस पे फोकस रखना है, another individual जो आपके एग्जाम के लिए important है, that is going to be Bentinck. Okay, William Bentinck. Then also another individual that you should know about is Macaulay. Macaulay, Bentinck, both of them are important. Okay. Apart from this, अगर और किसी पे फोकस रखना है, then that is Dalhousie. देखिए, Bentinck is during the 1820s, Macaulay during the 1830s, Dalhousie during the 1850s. No need to remember exact years. Broadly आपको पता होना चाहिए. Nobody is going to ask you years. Nobody is going to ask you arrange governor generals in order in which they came into India. ऐसा कोई नहीं पूछेगा. But you still must remember what are the major things done by each of them. Not all, but at least major. And we will see sector wise almost all their roles. Okay. So let's focus on civil services. In civil services we see C for civil services, C for Cornwallis. बहुत ही घटिया तरीका याद रखने का, कभी नहीं याद हो. ऐसे C ऐसे आप जोड़ेंगे तो कभी कुछ याद नहीं होगा. ऐसा कभी mnemonic मत बनाइएगा. It is the most useless mnemonic. Cornwallis basically is responsible for introducing civil services structure in India. And under Cornwallis, basically, as long as, and this is something I'm telling you as a context, understand this first, no need to write, just understand this. East India Company was a prosperous company, but prosperous companies also have good amount of corruption. East India Company had huge corruption. So much so that corrupt East India Company officials had bled the company dry. They would do corruption kaise? That they would come in India to do trade on behalf of East India Company, they would do their own private trade rather than East India Company's trade. They will say we bought 1,000 tons, but 100 tons got destroyed. And they would sell them as their own trading activity. They would get huge salaries. So corruption was one of the rampant things in the civil services. And when Cornwallis came, he is actually more interested in ensuring that this corruption within the civil services is tackled. So what does Cornwallis do? You don't need to just remember he is introducing civil services, but he is also taking swift steps to tackle corruption in civil services. How? He said that we need to do what? He said that we need to do what? We need to, firstly, he said, to tackle corruption, he firstly said that we should increase salaries of the civil servants. Why? Because if you increase their salaries, they will have less incentive to get easily swayed. For example, if they were collecting revenues, so revenue collection from one region is, say, a certain amount of money, they would underreport revenue. Right. So to all deal with all that of things, firstly they said increase the salaries of the civil servants. Secondly, he is saying that there must be no nepotism, that you get your relatives promoted, your brother, sister promoted, etc. So for that, the promotions would be on the basis of seniority only. To tackle what? Nepotism. That is not all. And there is also another thing that he is saying is that by if we are, and also he banned what? He banned the practice, he banned private trade, that is there. But apart from banning private trade, he also said that civil servants could not accept any gifts. That civil servants could not accept any presents from, wait, I'll give you time to ask question. Civil servants could not, I'll give time. Civil servants could not accept any presents from locals. ऐसा नहीं कि basically the local jagirdar say you had to collect revenue. Local jagirdar said, why can't we be friends? I like your rule very much. You are very efficient. Let me present you a gift. He gave you 5 acres of land as a gift. And then you developed a soft corner for him and you're no longer connecting revenues very efficiently. So, to prevent all of that, basically disallowed what? Use of or disallowed presents from being accepted. That is why civil services in India also has this, you know, you have a code of conduct. In that code of conduct, above a monetary amount of, say, I think 20,000 or I think it is about 20,000. You cannot accept any monetary or non-monetary gift whose market value may be above 20,000. If it is there, if it is given to you in your official capacity, you have to submit it to the President office, to the Government of India's office. Only then the government will decide. ऐसा नहीं है कि आप किसी embassy में इंडिया के ambassador बैठे हुए हैं सऊदी अरेबिया में, Saudi Arabian king comes and says, oh, I like you so much, you've done so much for India Saudi Arabia relations. लो, यहाँ से जहाँ तक जो ज़मीन दिख रही है तुम्हारी. Can't do it. You can't accept that primarily because there's otherwise there is a conflict of interest. It can be a payback for some kind of shady deal, whatever. So you see that Ambanis have produced a movie for Hollandaise partner, right? The Indian Express carried that story, Hindu did not. जो हिंदू पढ़ते हैं उनको पता नहीं, जो Express पढ़ते हैं उनको पता होगा, right? Carried 2 days before the Rafale deal. Ambani's produced a movie for the French president's partner 2 days before the deal is signed. So Ambani has entertainment, Reliance Entertainment produced that movie. The conflict of interest, right? So that is something which is there. Let me just complete civil services, then I'll give you time to ask question on civil services, whatever is there. Now, this is something that is done by Cornwallis. Now, Cornwallis also introduced something else, and this is something that is relevant in all aspects of British administrative structure. Racial discrimination. All the positions, the higher positions in the civil services, army, policing structure, all are reserved only for British, okay, or only for the white population. And basically he clarified this and saying so much by 1793 that all the positions in the British administrative structure above the salaries of some, I think 300 pounds a year. 500, okay, 500 pounds a year. PowerPoint presentation I have given the exact amount. Please see, 300 or 500 is not the concern. The bigger concern is that he said that all positions above this will be open only to the British. It won't be open to Indians. Why? Because Indians are incompetent, Indians are corrupt and they can't be trusted. Okay. So, आप incompetent भी है, corrupt भी है, and you can't be trusted also. So, he is saying that is why we will not open these positions. This is all that Cornwallis does in civil services. Cornwallis is considered as one of the key architects of British administrative structure in India, not just in civil services, but we'll also see in policing structure. Okay, we'll also see that he introduced key changes in judicial structure also. तो वो सारा आपको एक चीज आप ला सकते हैं लेकिन एक साथ, लेकिन we'll study sector by sector. Okay, so this is something that he does. Now, and above this open only for British, right? Apart from this, what is other thing that Cornwallis is doing is, what is another thing that Cornwallis is doing is that apart from this, okay, one of the, that's all about Cornwallis here, but what other things are happening here is that these civil services, these positions were highly paid and there was an intense competition where in Britain, there was an intense competition in Britain for getting an entry into civil services, but there was no competitive exam. Appointments to the as East India Company's officials, they are the civil services at this time, is done only by the East India Company. There is no role for government. Okay. However, there is intense public pressure in Britain to open these services to a transparent examination, and the British Crown intervenes, and in the Charter Act of 1853, the Charter Acts we'll study separately also, but because we are studying civil services, so I am telling here, in the Charter Act of 1853, for the first time, there is to be a civil services exam. Okay, so for the first time in 1853, there was to be an exam for civil servants, but this was open only to British citizens. This was only open to British citizens. It was not open to Indian citizens. And this exam was held only in London. It was open only to British citizens after the Charter Act of 1853. They'll give all these details in a prelims question. What will the kind of question they'll give? That with respect to civil services, which of the following statements are true? All positions above, say, £500 a year open only to British. Cornwallis introduced the civil services structure in India. That the Charter Act of 1853 threw open the exam to British citizens. And they'll tell you to pick 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Which of the following statements are correct? आपको याद रखना है. उसमें और में कोई लॉजिक नहीं है. बट मैं सबके पीछे का कॉन्टेक्स्ट बताता जा रहा हूँ ताकि कुछ स्टोरी भी पता हो आपको. ऐसे आप याद करते रहेंगे तो फिर कुछ unless and until you remember some context. So basically, the Act of 1853 is doing what? A long-standing demand of British society is met, and the exam for civil services is thrown open to British citizens, and making it sure that there is now a transparent open system of recruitment, because these positions were highly sought after in the British society. Indians क्या कहेंगे भाई? Open the positions to us also. Right? Educated Indians wanted these positions to be thrown open to Indian citizens also. Government of India Act 1858. The Government of India Act 1858, and we'll study this in detail when we'll study the revolt of 1857. The Government of India Act 1858 said, don't worry, we'll throw open the exam to Indians. Okay, we will throw open the exam to Indians. And 1859 onwards, and the Act of 1861. With the Act of 1861, the exam was thrown open to Indians, but conditions apply. Conditions are what? That they slowly, firstly the exam was held. Though they threw open the exam to Indians, there was no desire to include Indians within the structure of administration in a very major fashion. And thus, though they threw open the exam to Indians, they made the exam so difficult that most of the Indians could not even think of qualifying the exam. How? By keeping the curriculum of the exam such. For example, it required mandatory knowledge of languages such as Greek and Latin. Okay. The exam was to be held only in London, and the maximum age for writing the exam was decreased from 23 to 19 years. The maximum age was decreased from 23 to 19 years. After 1861, slowly all these changes were introduced, and this is the situation by 1878. By 1878, this is what arises as the situation. So though the exam was thrown open to Indians, this basically the exam was to be held only in London, required proficiency in these languages, decreased the maximum eligible age for entry into the civil services, which meant what? That entry for Indians would be extremely tough, right? And this is not all. This does not stop here. So what is the demand of early Indian nationalists? The demand of the early Indian nationalists was what? Was the Indianization of civil services. They said ये तो unfair है. So these early Indian nationalists were whom? Educated Indian middle class. Okay, so they argued that this is unfair. You should relax these norms. It is by 1888 that some of these norms were relaxed. Satyendranath Tagore, Satyendranath Tagore became the first Indian to become the civil servant. Okay, so they come from the Tagore family, right? Devendranath Tagore, then Satyendranath Tagore, then Rabindranath Tagore, Tagores. The legacy of Tagore is one of the relatively wealthy, educated families of Bengal, who were called, for example, the Bengali Bhadralok, right? So that is something which is, मतलब Bhadralok basically they used to say कि भाई who are the upper caste, relatively wealthy sections were termed as Bhadraloks in Bengal, and they are called as the, which is not a very, which was a term partly used. Bhadralok basically ऊंचे लोग. With it was a symbol of contempt. It was not something that was said with too much affection. भद्रलोक मतलब जो अपने आप को बहुत ही वो समझते हैं. But basically this was, so it's not that they did or something, but basically this was something which was often used as a term for the elite sections of Bengali society. Bhadralok was a term used for the elite sections, upper class, upper caste, wealthy, educated sections of the Bengali society. A number of them obviously Western educated. This term was used, okay, by those obviously who were not any of it, right? Upper class, upper caste, wealthy, etc. Right? So that is there. Ek second. Sir, hope I'll give you. It's not that I don't give you time, ना. आपको पूछूंगा कि मैं आपको क्या डाउट है बताइए. एक पूरी कहानी सुन लीजिए. अभी ये खत्म नहीं हुई है. इसके बाद when they started allowing entry into the civil services, it is getting divided into two: covenanted and non-covenanted civil services. They said, okay, if civil services is being thrown open to Indians, it does not mean that you can have a governor of a state or some very, the DM or something like a Indian. Even though it was being thrown open to Indians, some very highly important positions in the bureaucracy would still not be open to Indians. And they are saying that they would be covenanted and non-covenanted civil services. Okay, उतना डिटेल में अभी आपको जाने का जरूरत नहीं है. We'll come to it again later. So this is broad idea about civil services. हाँ, any doubt still here? बताइए. अभी रुक जाइए, अभी आएंगे. चार्टर एक्ट जब हम पढ़ाएंगे, हाँ,
in private businesses with the
मैंने रेगुलेटिंग एक्ट का नाम नहीं लिया अभी तक.
sir 1773 में, so that's why I asked you that code of directors.
अभी हम 1773, 1784, 1813, 1833 सब पढ़ेंगे. रुक जाइए.
Sir, my doubt is sir 1785 का 1785 में ये कॉर्नवालिस आता है. So कॉर्नवालिस 1785 में आया, but regulating act 1773 में आया. So 1773 में ही the code of directors were prohibited from engaging in any type of trade with the locals. So how come Lord Cornwallis got all these things? Because it was already mentioned in the regulating act of 1773.
अभी रुक जाइए. मैं अभी भी यही बोलूँ. आपका डाउट है, आप रुक जाओगे. जब मैं बोल रहा हूँ आई गिव यू टाइम. जब मैं 1773 एक्ट की बात करूंगा तो फर्स्ट टेल व्हाट इज द कोर्ट ऑफ डायरेक्टर, व्हाट इज बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल, व्हाट इज द रोल ऑफ कोर्ट ऑफ डायरेक्टर. फिर हम पावर्स पे आएंगे, फिर वहां पे मैं आपको बता दूंगा. ठीक है. और बताइए. एनी अदर डाउट? नो इश्यूज. और बताइए. एनी अदर डाउट स्टिल देयर? नाउ if that is about civil services as a broad idea, the next thing that we have to focus upon is policing structure. Civil services reform is a very important topic. We talk about that today the civil services needs a number of reforms. We say lateral entry is required. We say many other things. ये सारे topics important है. आपके syllabus में सीधा सीधा line लिखा हुआ है. Civil services in democracy, issues and challenges. ये सीधा सीधा syllabus में mentioned है. In governance, in paper 2 also, it can come in ethics also. What kind of reforms are needed in civil services? One of the things which has been increasingly talked about these days is lateral entry, right? That was there in newspaper. Government has opened 10 positions, right? So that is there. Now, policing. When we talk about policing, what is for you to focus on is that the key individual again responsible for introducing the policing structure in India is whom? Okay. And Cornwallis is saying what? He modernized the older system of thanas. Cornwallis modernized the older system of thanas. Basically, ऐसा नहीं है that before the British came, there was no any kind of policing structure. Rather, there were policing structures even before the British, but we are not studying that. Our focus is only on a preliminary understanding of British structure in India. And what they focused on was modernizing the thanas. Thanas often came with a specific territorial jurisdiction. For example, we say that there is a Karol Bagh, there is Rajendra Nagar, right? So every region will have the police station in every region will have a specific territorial jurisdiction. Okay, this is a system that is put in place by Cornwallis by reforming the older systems. Now, what is Cornwallis saying? That up till the level of the thanas, a Indian official can be appointed in the policing structure, and basically the Indians could be appointed till the level of daroga, who would head a particular thana, right? Indians could be appointed till the level of opposition of a daroga. Any position above the position of the daroga in the policing or law and order system would be only for the British. So in one district there could be many such thanas. All of them will report to whom? The SP. The position of SP was introduced by Cornwallis. The position of SP was introduced by whom? Cornwallis. So Cornwallis had introduced two kinds of administrative structures in every district. One was to oversee the day-to-day administration and more importantly what? Revenue collection. Who would be there? They would be the district magistrate, or what you term as today basically the district magistrates. They would be in charge of day-to-day administration. For police and law and order, there would be the SP. So this is how these organs had probably come into existence at the district level. So Cornwallis introduced the position of SP, okay, and the rest of the administrative powers were with the, and including overseeing revenue administration is with whom? DM, right? Very obvious, right? Now this is not all. When Cornwallis introduced this undergoes a change. Later, after Cornwallis, comes William Bentinck, and Bentinck basically changed this system. What did Bentinck say? Bentinck said, we don't need SP. We don't need SP. Bentinck argued that removed the position of SP and removed the position of SP and did what? After removing the position of SP, did what? Transferred this role to whom? DM. The district magistrate now, after, and Bentinck comes, right, in 1820s. So after the coming of Bentinck, these roles are being transferred to whom? DM. DM already is in charge of administration, revenue collection, उसको law and order का भी responsibility दे दिया, तो क्या होगा? That ultimately it is going to lead to overburdening of the DM. And this is what was soon realized, that DM is getting overburdened. So as DM is getting overburdened, basically this is what was seen. So basically a new act was introduced. And under this act, basically the position of SP was what? Reintroduced. The position of SP was reintroduced. तो ये आपको basic पता होना चाहिए. At least this much. Any doubts? Anything you want to ask on policing? Yeah. देखिए बड़ा जीवन में एक सिंपल सा सही है, कोई आदमी पावर नहीं छोड़ना चाहता है. If DM is getting more power, DM will never say I am getting overburdened. DM will say all ले आओ. More power means more authority. Nobody says अरे I don't like power or authority. So in that context, yes. So basically there is nobody who wants to give up power. If you ask IAS officer, can you be home secretary? He'll say yes. Can you be environment secretary? He'll say yes. Can you be foreign secretary? He'll say yes. Can you be coal secretary? He'll say yes. Can you be anything? I can be anything. Just give me power. I'll pick up the skills on the job. Right? So that is why, anyways, so we were talking but today ki bhai there must be specialists. Right? And you can't be like at the highest policy making levels, you require more specialists. तो देखिए एक इंटरेस्टिंग चीज़ आपको बताता हूँ, क्योंकि ये बात हो गई तो अभी क्या हो रहा है, सरकार ने 100 सीटें कम कर दी हैं. आने दीजिए और नोटिफिकेशन 1-2 साल में यही सरकार रहेगी तो और सीटें कम हो जाएंगी. In 1999, the seats, the last time the BJP was there, the seats fell to 400. It's a stated policy of this current political party to reduce intake. तो एक तरफ तो there is a reduction in intake, एक तरफ other तरफ is there what? Lateral entry, opening it to the private sector. तो जिन ब्यूरोक्रेट्स के बच्चों का नया हुआ है सिलेक्शन अभी तक, वो आएंगे lateral entry से. There is a lot of resistance in the civil services to lateral entry, and a lot of people are angry with lateral entry being allowed, because it's an opening made for 10 posts today, and these are not posts like niche wala, these are the highest level posts, joint secretary and above. So already there is a shortage. The civil service, we keep saying, study in foreign policy, the size of Singapore ka foreign service is bigger than India's foreign service. Singapore and India. Singapore ka foreign service ka size is bigger than India. We need to dramatically upscale recruitment, especially in things like foreign services, which are very understaffed, and the governments have been cutting down. Okay, so that there is that point of concern. Nobody wants to give up power, and even if you're recruiting from the private sector, which also lowers the morale of those who are sweating it out in the civil services from the bottom. So that is there. Now let's come back here. So the position of the SP is reintroduced. Next topic that you broadly need to know about is judiciary. Judiciary it's not that there were no judicial structures in India before the British arrived. There were, but the British basically talked about introducing new systems of judicial structures in India based upon two things: the rule of law and also what? Equality before law. They said we are a superior civilization. Why? Because we have the rule of law and we have equality before the law. We are here to bring this gift to India also. The rule of law and equality before law. That basically, irrespective of an individual's position, class, rich or poor, the same crime will be punished with the same punishment, and the rules will apply equally to one and all. Now this is said, and it is in this context, then the British say, we are serious about this, and the British introduced under again Warren Hastings this time. Warren Hastings is the one under whom some of the first education institutions in India were established, and I've given those names: Calcutta, Fort William, and all these things in the PowerPoint presentation. Will come to education anyway separately. But more importantly here, the judicial structure, its foundation is laid by Cornwallis. And they say that we are trying to introduce what? Equality before the law. When we talk about equality before the law, they said laws will apply equally to one and all. And Hastings introduced, Warren Hastings introduced two kinds of courts in India. Firstly, he said there will be two separate set of laws. Okay, one and okay, we'll come to this later, but there will be two separate courts, types of courts in India. One which will be the Diwani courts, and they started obviously from where? Bengal, because Bengal is the first region where they are establishing their presence. Okay, and Diwani courts, and there would be Fauzdari, F-A-U-Z, Fauzdari courts. Diwani courts and Fauzdari courts. Diwani courts will be for settling what matters? For settling civil matters, and civil matters often related to disputes related to revenue settlement. Suppose a British revenue collecting official came and tried to collect or collected more than the revenue rates permitted. Suppose the government said 20% must be collected, but he tries to collect 40%, or government says 30% must be collected, he tries to collect 50%. Then whom do you approach? The Diwani courts. And one thing also, suppose somebody else encroaches on your land. I forcibly try to acquire your land. This is a civil matter, revenue matter, etc. And I will approach the court. Why is judiciary also important? Why is rule of law also important? Why? Because if there is no rule of law, I will capture your land, you will capture my land. And this means that there can be no property rights in land. Very simply, there can be no property rights in land. If you will capture my land, I will capture your land. Right? So, in that context, Diwani courts were established. But not just Diwani courts. There is also the establishment of the Fauzdari courts. They were for criminal matters, murder, robbery, all such matters. There were Fauzdari courts. Okay. Now, these courts were not established at the level of villages or anything. They are established only in key urban centers or at the district level only in a key number of districts. Especially Fauzdari courts were relatively few in number. The Diwani courts were relatively more in number. Okay. Now, apart from this, this is introduced by Hastings. However, after Hastings comes whom? अब देखिए जैसे आप ये बोल रहे हैं कि आपने देखी कोई हिंदी पिक्चर तो ही अक्वायर्ड फोर्सिबली अक्वायर्ड योर लैंड तो मैटर दीवानी है बट ही मर्डर्ड ऑल्सो सो मुझे नहीं पता आई डोंट नो ओके व्हाट इज हु विल लिसन टू द मैटर ओके सो बेसिकली व्हाट इज बीइंग डन बाय Cornwallis is doing something important and you must know this because they'll ask these kind of details. That in what Cornwallis is saying is that okay, this is fine, but the system has a problem. Suppose you want to appeal the verdict of the Diwani court. There is no court of appeal. They are the first and final courts. There must be some court of appeal. So he says that we need to reform the system and we must provide a court of appeal. So he says okay, let the Diwani courts stay, but the Diwani courts verdicts must be there must be a court of appeal. If you are not satisfied with the Diwani court's verdict, you must be allowed to go to a higher court to appeal it. And for this there were established what was called as the circuit courts. Circuit courts. But these circuit courts were there and there were Diwani courts. But what happened to Fauzdari court? Basically, they said that what Cornwallis said was to replace Fauzdari courts with circuit courts. Now, circuit courts will do two functions. One, they will be the court of appeal for civil matters. And they will be the first and final court for whom? For criminal matters. First and final court for it will be the first and the final court for criminal matters and will be the court of appeal for civil matters. Or the Diwani courts. Is this point clear? Everybody? Yeah.
Sir, I have actually wanted to ask you, like when this court system was established, तो ये Britishers जो है अगर कोई British ने कोई crime किया है Indian के खिलाफ
I know what your question है अभी आगे आएंगे इसलिए मैंने पूछा ये पॉइंट अभी समझ में आ गया आपको हाँ So Hastings, yes. Anyways, Hastings is the one who comes before Cornwallis. Okay. So Hastings comes first, then comes Cornwallis. Cornwallis is modifying the system established by Hastings. And what is he doing? He is not abandoning the system, he is modifying it. Fauzdari courts with circuit courts. और ये point clear है? हाँ इस पॉइंट में कोई दिक्कत है हाँ हाँ सर्किट कोर्ट अपील हाँ Okay, that is what means court of appeal. कोई तो हो सुनने वाला. If district court does not believe the truth, if you don't not happy with the verdict of district court, you can go to the high court. That is the court of appeal. High court की verdict से you're not happy, then you go to the Supreme Court. If Supreme Court's court of verdict you're not happy, there is no other higher court. Then there is only God. There is no president. President cannot overrule Supreme Court's verdict. Only God can.
Court of appeal and the circuit court are two different.
Court of appeal and circuit courts are, देखिए यही जो मैं आपको बता रहा हूं कि कोर्ट ऑफ अपील इट विल सर्व एज अ कोर्ट ऑफ अपील. कोर्ट ऑफ अपील तो एक टर्म होता है कि आप लोअर कोर्ट की वर्डिक्ट को हायर कोर्ट में अपील कर सकते हैं. हु विल सर्व एज द कोर्ट ऑफ अपील? दे आर सेइंग दैट द सर्किट कोर्ट विल सर्व एज अ कोर्ट ऑफ अपील. इस पॉइंट में दिक्कत है. हाँ, सर्किट कोर्ट वाज अ no, that is what I'm saying. There is no court of appeal for criminal matters. It's the first and the final court for criminal matters. Is this point clear? ये point वो आपको सीधा सीधा लाइन में देंगे. That basically Cornwallis introduced the circuit courts, okay, or introduced the circuit courts which were the criminal courts, which is true. Also the court of appeal for civil matters, which is also true. Is this point clear? क्योंकि आपको ये key changes ही याद रखने. You can't be studying everything in detail. We only have to remember what changes were introduced and who introduced them. Okay, so this is there, but it does not stop here. One of the things is that they talked about equality of law and equality before the law. Okay, and basically the rule of law or equality before the law. And that is why they said that this is the system that we are introducing in India. Because in India there is caste system. So upper caste may receive a much lighter punishment than the lower caste. And basically the same crime, different regions may have different punishments for the same crime. Different caste groups may be treated differently. Different genders may be treated differently. So there is no equality before the law in India. We are here to change it. And one of the steps in that direction is to codify laws. Firstly, let's have written laws which are codified and which apply equally to all areas. Because in the pre-British area there were regional variations. Different regions had different laws. And there was no uniform applicability. They are talking about a uniform applicability of laws. Laws which are written, laws which are codified, and which have established procedures of determining what is an act of robbery, what will be considered as an evidence in an act of robbery, what will be the procedure of investigation, what will be the procedure of determining what can count as a evidence. ये सारी चीजें should be written, should be codified, should be documented, and for this purpose a commission is appointed, and that commission is which under Lord Macaulay in 1831 a commission is appointed under Lord Macaulay, that is the Macaulay Commission. The Macaulay Commission was appointed with the purpose of codifying laws and make recommendations for codifying laws. The Macaulay Commission make recommendations for codifying laws. On the Macaulay Commission submitted its report. 3 decades later, it is on the Macaulay Commission's report recommendations that the IPC, the CPC, the CRPC, the Indian Penal Code, the Civil Procedure Code, the Criminal Procedure Code is drafted. Penal Code, देखिए Penal Code में क्या होता है? What is punishment? What will be the punishment for murder? It will be written in the Penal Code. What will be the punishment for attempted murder? What will be the punishment for manslaughter? ये सारी details, murder किस condition में हो रहा है, so उसके according क्या punishment होगा? Minimum maximum range of that punishment is written in the Penal Code. सिविल प्रोसीजर कोड बता रहा हूं मैं ताकि आपको कुछ पता भी तो हो. ऐसे आपने रट लिया कि आईपीसी होता है, सीपीसी होता है, सीआरपीसी होता है. क्या होता है? किसी ने पूछा तो आपको कुछ ब्रॉड तो पता हो. CPC, the Civil Procedure Code, talks about the procedure that has to be followed. What can be counted as evidence? What is the procedure to be followed in case of a crime? Whose testimony can be accepted, whose testimony cannot be accepted? ये सारी चीजें, ये होता है that for civil matters what procedure will be followed. That is talked about as the Civil Procedure Code. For criminal matters, the procedure to be followed is Criminal Procedure Code. Okay, that is there. So आपने किसी से you get a confession, a forced confession, that will not count as evidence. Under the procedure codes, a forced confession extracted by the police is not counted as a evidence. Okay. तो अभी जैसे पुलिस ने बोला कि हमारे पास यह है कि वो लेटर लिखा उन्होंने, वो लेटर में वो बहुत बड़ी बड़ी बातें कर रहे थे, वो लेटर कहाँ है? वो पुलिस हैज नॉट सबमिटेड टू द कोर्ट, though that is with a number of news channels, it is not with court. Okay, so what kind of evidence can be accepted? जैसे किसी ने बोला कि इन पे लग गया सेडेशन एक्ट, why? Because they were found in holding literature, Naxal literature. So can that be counted as evidence? The Sedition Act says no. Merely in possession of certain literature which may be considered inflammatory by some, that cannot become a ground. Otherwise, तो फिर अगर if you are reading a book on Mao, तो हो गए आप Maoist. By that stretch, if you are reading a book on Gandhi, then you become Gandhian. So that is merely possession of literature cannot be used unless and until there is clear demonstrable proof that a armed overthrow of the state is being planned. A Sedition Act must ideally not be invoked, but it is often invoked. It has been often used against cartoonists or against activists. Right? Binayak Sen was there, Asim Trivedi, a number of anti-nuclear power plant protesters. So a number of times sedition law has been invoked, saying that these are the ones who are planning the overthrow of the state. So it is historically been not invoked. For example, Gandhi was charged with sedition. Right? So Gandhi said that it is an honor to be charged with the sedition law. So what in law appears to be illegal appears to me to be the highest moral duty of the citizen, to overthrow the British state in India. I am charged with sedition, so be it. I am glad about it. If released from jail, I will do again. So the judge held his head. But Gandhi is making a very important idea and argument here that demanding the overthrow of state is not illegal, or even if it is illegal, it is not unethical. As long as he mentions that line that you are trying to overthrow the state by non-violent means. That is why the sedition law today is narrowly interpreted to say that overthrow of the state is not a crime. By all means, overthrow the state as long as it is non-violent or by legal means. So only when, and that is why establishing this is difficult, that only when you can show that there is a real armed conspiracy, only then sedition charges will hold. लेकिन इंडियन जुडिशियल सिस्टम ऐसा है कि लोग सालों तक जेल के अंदर रहते हैं and then only much later are they released. So this is done by the Macaulay. Coming back here, Macaulay Commission is recommending on the basis of which 1861 CPC, CRPC and IPC are brought about, written. Next important point is, what about, sir, are they really serious about equality before the law? Not very serious, because when equality before the law came to bite the British, that is not when they are very happy. Rather, under the British system, though judges were appointed from amongst Indians also, no Indian judge could sit on a case involving a European. Basically, if an Indian judge, no Indian judge could sit on a case involving no Indian judge could sit on a case involving whom? A British or a European in general. Why? Because it went against the idea of racial superiority. How can a non-white individual determine whether the white individual has acted legally or illegally? Who is he? He is an inferior civilization. How can he determine? So this was not allowed, and Indian judges could not sit on a case involving a European. Much later, in after 1880, basically a bill was introduced this bill was the Ilbert Bill. This bill was introduced under Lord Ripon. अभी हम बाद में आएंगे. Lord Lytton and Lord Ripon, दो भाई. They came one after the other. 1876 to 1880 was Lord Lytton, and was Lord Lytton, and 1880 onwards is Lord Ripon. And उनकी बात हम बाद में करेंगे. They all, जो मैं आपको जितने names बता रहा हूँ, they all important. इन सब पे या तो आया हुआ है या they are very important. Okay, so they've asked the question on the Ilbert Bill. 2014 prelims examination, they asked the question, what was the Ilbert Bill controversy about? They did not ask that it was introduced in 1880 or it was introduced under Ripon, but what was the controversy about? The Ilbert Bill is saying that this must be abolished. Ilbert Bill is saying that abolish this racial discrimination in judiciary. How many women chief justices have happened in the Supreme Court of India? Chief Justice in Supreme Court of India? None. Right. So, if you look at, that is why I asked in India, in the Supreme Court, not High Court. If you keep High Court in Kerala, etc., and one or two others, there have been there. And that is why I asked Chief Justice. There have not been many. Okay. In the current Supreme Court also, I think there are one or two. चलिए जो भी है, एक नहीं तो दो तो नहीं, तीन है ना. 35 में से या 31 में से अगर तीन है तो कौन सी बड़ी बात होगी. So basically there is, just to say, दिमाग के घोड़े आप खोले रखिए, है ना. So basically this is something which is introduced by Lord Ripon, and the Ilbert Bill aimed to end the racial discrimination in the judiciary, though it could never be very effectively passed. Though it was passed, but not with, it was so many amendments were made to it that it was not very effective actually. But nonetheless, that is there. Okay. This, but iske alawa, though the British had introduced this judicial system had, the British introduced the judicial system with the focus on equality before the law. This judicial system had some problems also. One was the problem what? That law was written in a language that people barely understood. That is true even today. If you read a law, you can't understand. It is deliberately written in a language that people can't understand. There is no other solid logic. Okay, it is deliberately written in a language today that people can't understand. But koi baat nahi. Basically, laws were written and codified where vast amount of population was anyways illiterate in India. So to understand laws, they need what? Lawyers. Right. And lawyers do not come for free. They come for a fee. So law now became what? Or expensive. And often most of these courts were not located in rural areas or villages or at the level of villages, etc. They were either in urban areas or districts, centers far away from villages. So judicial structures were inaccessible, they were expensive, they were inaccessible, and soon the number of cases that flooded the judiciary was much higher than their ability to quickly solve these cases. So what will happen? Judicial delays. ये सारी problem आज भी हैं. Only the magnitude has gotten worse. Right? That expensive, inaccessible and judicial delays. ये आपको पता होना चाहिए. एक लाइन उन्होंने लिख दिया that British introduced the judicial system but it was marred by its expensive, inaccessible and nature and considerable delays. So it is a correct statement. ठीक है, ये ब्रॉड आपको जुडिशरी के बारे में पता होना चाहिए। एनीथिंग, अब आप बोलेंगे सर फर्स्ट सुप्रीम कोर्ट कब बना, देखिए अब बस अगर आप याद रखना ही चाहते हैं 1773 ऑनवर्ड्स, इट इज अंडर द एक्ट ऑफ 1773 एंड विल डिस्कस जब, तो मैं बता दूंगा। क्या कैलकाटा और कोलकाता एट दैट टाइम, कैलकाटा एट दैट टाइम द फर्स्ट सुप्रीम कोर्ट इज established इन द रीजन। फिर धीमे धीमे अब आप बोलेंगे सर अच्छा पहला वहां बना तो फिर बॉम्बे का कब बना, मेरे को नहीं पता, नॉट माई कंसर्न। if they want to ask, they may still add first is in Calcutta। वो एक जज का भी नाम है, वो मैं भूल गया, वो you will find in PowerPoint presentation or in one of that other documents that I'll give it to you। So there is no limit to facts, but we are only focusing on the broad ones। Yeah, what this issue? No, this issue is not related to Ilbert bill. Ilbert bill is only introduced to end. Yeah, this is a separate issue. I am saying other drawbacks of Indian judiciary introduced under the British system into India. Advantage is that they introduce equality before law. You can always say that it was not very efficiently implemented, but at least the idea was introduced. Clear? Any doubts? देखिए सुनना तो आपको है ही, ये इतने पॉइंट्स आप याद रख लीजिए एटलीस्ट, इट विल बी अ वेरी बिग रिलीफ। यू नो व्हेन आई यूज्ड टू स्टडी आई यूज्ड टू हेट दिस पार्ट, बट दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट। यू नो दे मे गिव अ फ्यू फैक्ट्स फ्रॉम हियर एंड देयर। ओके, नाउ हाँ so decentralization of judiciary is basically something जो हम शुरू में हमने बात किया। Yeah, so that it is, yeah, from there onwards itself. Anything else? Now the next thing to focus on is army के बारे में हम separately बात करेंगे when we'll talk about war of 1857। I'll tell you about the British structure of army there। Okay, what we are now focusing on is education policy of the British। Okay, now देखिए एक्चुअली नॉट जस्ट एजुकेशन इज इंपॉर्टेंट, प्रेस, ब्रिटिश पॉलिसी टुवर्ड्स प्रेस इज ऑल्सो इंपॉर्टेंट। प्रीलिम्स में देयर इज अ वेरी गुड चांस दे कैन गिव यू अ क्वेश्चन, मेंस में भी पूछ सकते हैं, डिस्कस द रोल प्लेड बाय प्रेस इन इंडियन नेशनलिज्म। ओके, तो प्रेस इज एक्चुअली अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक एंड विल टॉक अबाउट दिस ओके सेपरेटली, बट अभी हम सिर्फ एजुकेशन की बात कर रहे हैं। ओके, सो लेट्स टॉक अबाउट एजुकेशन एंड इन एजुकेशन पॉलिसी ऑफ ब्रिटिश। व्हाई आर वी स्टडिंग दिस is predominantly because the British were in charge in India right up till the 20th century। When British left India, the state of Indian primary education was in shambles। Okay, and the state of not just primary education but education in India just in general was in a very bad state। Okay, and what was the reason for this? Partly is the British policies in India। So we should have a broad understanding of this। Now, who established first Sanskrit college? किसने बनाया? Fort Williams किसने बनाया? Calcutta मदरसा किसने बनाया? I have given those names in the PowerPoint presentation। You read it from there। वो मेरा को कोई interest नहीं है discuss करने में। What I am more interested in discussing is the policies of the British and their impact। क्योंकि इस पे question mains में भी आ सकता है। आप पढ़ रहे हैं गांधी, नेहरू, पटेल, अंबेडकर, दे कैन आस्क यू डिस्कस द एजुकेशन पॉलिसी ऑफ द ब्रिटिश एंड इट्स इम्पैक्ट अपॉन colonial India। This is one topic they can directly ask in means because it's a substantive point। Okay, so to understand this, firstly one of the things that you must know is that we are going to study here 2 or 3 things। One thing is the debate within the British। Okay, And this debate within the British was in two camps, the Orientalists and the first fact that you must remember here about education policy की ये सारी डिबेट कब चालू होगी? एजुकेशन की पॉलिसी जब बनाएंगे जब आप पैसा लगाएंगे. अगर आप पैसा ही नहीं दे रहे हैं तो फिर पॉलिसी क्या करेगी? राइट. सो बेसिकली यू सी after the Charter Act of 1813 they agreed to allot 1 lakh rupees for the purpose of Indian education. Okay, the British Crown in the Charter Act of 1813 agreed to allot 1 lakh rupees, but even though they agreed to allot 1 lakh rupees, it was not immediately used. For the next 10 years they kept debating of what to do with this money. Okay, as if this was some supremely high amount of money. It was a meager amount of fund, but they debated what should be done with this fund. Okay, it is only after 1820 that actually this fund is going to get used. Only after 1820s these funds were put to use. For the next 10 years they did not put this to use, rather they debated. So what was the debate? The debate was on two features, on two major issues. One was what must be the content of education, what must be the medium of education, and thirdly also what must be the objective of education. तो आप बोले सर ऑब्जेक्टिव में क्या दिक्कत है? एजुकेशन का ऑब्जेक्टिव इज टू गेट जॉब्स. एजुकेशन का ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है? आप अपने घर वाले से पूछिए क्यों चाहते हो कि हम पढ़ें? यस. सो आपके घर वाले चाहते हैं कि आप पढ़ाई करें ताकि आपको नौकरी मिले. यहां पे ये उनका कंसर्न नहीं है. द मेन डिबेट इज बिटवीन द ओरिएंटलिस्ट एंड द एंग्लिसिस्ट on two or three main issues. First is what must be the objective of this education policy. Secondly, what must be the content, and thirdly what must be the medium. Okay, ये तीन issues थे main जिस पे इनके बीच में discussion था. Objective, and here one of the Orientalists said that the objective is what? Universalization of education, or what? Educating the masses. इन्होंने बोला that we need to educate the masses. क्यों? Why should we educate the masses? They can repay proper taxes. No. They can help in administration. India's, so that they can recruit locals, etc. Recruitment of locals and administration is an issue, and I'll come to it. But for that, they would need to educate the masses or universalize education. They want to create a market. They would get associated with the Britishers. देखिए Orientalists जो है नेक दिल लोग हैं. कुछ लोगों का दिल साफ है. Orientalists are saying that we are here on a civilizing mission. What sort of a civilization can you build without education? So रुक जाइए, वो अलग है, वो Anglicists हैं. Orientalists are saying that we should universalize education, because what sort of civilization can you build without education and without educating everybody? That is why in India we have so many people who are uneducated. 2009 only that we introduced the right to education in India, to universalize primary education for 6 to 14 years age group. The other problem is not just quantity of education in India, quality also. We produce such remarkable educated individuals on a daily basis. which are visible on Facebook and Twitter, right? So the other thing is quality also. So that is there. So firstly they talked about universalization of educating or masses primarily to attain the objective of the civilizing mission. Okay, that is what they're saying. That if we are here to bring civilization to them, what other way can be there than bringing education? The Orientalists were people like J.J. Thompson. ये नाम important है. You must remember this name. These are British administrators. These debates are within the British. Okay, these debates are within the Britishers. It's not with Indians. It is the debate within the British administrators. Anglicists were people like Thomas Macaulay. The same Macaulay Commission wala. He is the one who is the Anglicist. Anglicists are basically have a clear racial bent. They have a clear racial bent, and they are saying that firstly Europeans are superior to Indians in every way. So Europeans are superior to Indians, and this is also there in education. European education is superior to Indian education. Forget that for a minute. They are saying, why should we educate the Indian masses? Rather, our education policy must be geared towards what? As you all are saying, lowering the cost of administration by creating a band of educated Indians. These educated Indians will do what? They will help in providing the lower clerical staff in India. And thus, we will not have to bring any such staff from abroad. Lower clerical staff trained in basic education, and with basic education, this lower clerical class can be recruited from India. And thus, by education policy of the British, we can lower the cost of administration in the region. So basically they had a clear racial bent, and they argued that education policy must create what? A class of, it must create a class of or a band of educated middle class Indians. They will do 2 or 3 things. They will do one, what? They will help in lowering the costs of education, lowering the cost of administration. That is not all. They will help in another way. How? Is that these educated Indians, these section of middle class educated Indians can lower the cost of administration also. They will what? They will become the mascots of whom? Of the British rule in India. They will basically, when they get educated, they will get jobs. What will they say? British rule is good or bad? Good. So basically, they'll create a class of educated middle class Indians who would support the British rule in India. Or whatever they want to do, universalization of primary education. So these educated middle class can educate fellow Indians. They can set up schools and educate fellow Indians. Why should the British government take up the responsibility? There can be what? देखिए, I like this very much. That आप पानी ऊपर से डालें तो नीचे आता है. You educate the top section of Indians, they will educate other fellow Indians. each one teach one, है ना? That each one can teach one. So I educate you, you educate one others. So that's how everybody will get educated, right? Whether they want to keep India clean, you should keep your surrounding clean. India will become clean. This is called Facebook level enlightenment. So basically what is happening here is that public participation is the key for solving problems. ये आप हर जगह सुनते हैं. इसमें argument है public participation is a key to complement state delivery of services or to compensate for state not acting. जैसे आप सुनते करप्शन, वही बात कि आप मत दीजिए तो करप्शन नहीं होगा. अरे if cleanliness can be only ensured by you putting the wrapper in the dustbin, then India would have been swachh long ago. Right? It is not merely state capacity cannot be replaced by citizen action. Citizens can only complement state, and the primary responsibility has to be state. जैसे सरकार ने कहा, एक भारत सरकार की एक हेल्थ स्कीम है, under which I don't remember its name, something on women, maternity services for women, that private hospitals once in a month there is some scheme, right? Which is that scheme? हाँ, नहीं, जननी सुरक्षा तक मत जाइए, ऐसी नहीं है. एक है, some scheme is there that private sectors will provide. You can go and search that hospitals, doctors can provide 1 day free checkup for pregnant women. Okay, how on earth will it reduce maternal mortality? Somebody should explain me. Ultimately, the government has to invest in universalization of healthcare. That is the solution. Private sector providing 1 day charity is not the solution. It can only complement, but ultimately to give that impression कि भाई each one can teach one, and education crisis in India would be solved, would have been solved long ago. Cannot happen. You can't say this कि अरे you are a doctor, provide 1 day free service, educate, health problem in India will get solved. It will not solve, it will not dent it even 1 bit. Okay, so you have to provide the structure, and this is something the British are not really interested in doing. So they are saying that downward filtration theory. ये आपसे पूछेंगे prelims में. That the downward, what did the downward filtration theory say? Macaulay is the supporter of downward filtration theory. The downward filtration theory is saying that we will educate the Indian masses. We will educate the middle class Indians. From them, education will filter down to the lower social classes. Or under the downward filtration theory, they said that educated Indians can set up more schools, and we will only educate a section, they can educate other Indians, and that can achieve mass education if required. Okay, so it is up to the Indians whether they want to educate other Indians or not. British government has no role. So that is there. Okay, ये तो पहली डिबेट ही हो गई इतनी बड़ी कि ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है. 10 साल ऐसे थोड़े ना लगे, है ना. So this is the first debate within the camps. The other debate is upon, next two are very simple, content and medium. देखिए आपको एक बड़ी सिंपल सी बात बताता हूँ. कंटेंट और मीडियम के लिए एक एग्जाम्पल लेते हैं. You've seen that movie Newton? If you have not, then you must. If you have, then you will understand the example. Basically, the protagonist, apart from Rajkumar Rao, is one tribal woman, right? Who is a teacher. In the movie, she says that what does she do? She teaches students, and she teaches students the Gond tribals. Okay. One of the challenges in tribal education in India is this, that you give them NCERT textbook, tribals will throw them away. Why? They are written in a language that they don't understand, which is not just English but also Hindi. Gondi, the Gond tribes speak Gondi, they don't speak Hindi. Okay, so you give them books in a language, and the content also of the book is that A is for apple. A Gond individual has never seen an apple in his life. What is A for apple? A for astronaut bol dijiye aap. That does not make any sense. Content of education is something that must be relatable. I teach you seedhe French history, no Indian history. What will you understand? Will you find it relatable? No. Content of the education must be something that is relatable to the masses. Only then education will become interesting and relevant. If P is for pomegranate and an individual has never seen pomegranate in his life, unlikely to see also, what is that education? So, in the sense that content of education must be what? Local, or it must be local in both content and language. Only then it can become relevant, accessible and interesting to the masses. But ये सब करने की ज़रूरत कब है? Then you want to give them education. If you are serious about educating them, then you should do all these things, content, etc., and local languages, as well as also, for example, say history. You teach Gond individual, or you see, you teach a Santhal कि भाई Gandhi is the father of the nation. Gandhi ने ये किया, Gandhi ने वो किया. अरे उसको क्या मतलब? You first tell them that what Santhals have done. There is no such history of India, which is one history. History of India is involved history of different regions. If Gandhi is important to the Indian freedom struggle, according to you, then according to a Santhal, Birsa Munda is more important than Gandhi. So, content of education क्या है? That has to be driven. तभी वो कैसे पूछेंगे freedom fighter of North East in Indian freedom struggle. आपने तो सुना ही नहीं नाम. गोपीनाथ बरदोली and others are there. So, अगर आपने नाम ही नहीं सुना, आपको क्या? इंडियन फ्रीडम स्ट्रगल चालू होता है गांधी से, जाता है नेहरू से, ज्यादा से ज्यादा बोस तक, और ज्यादा चला गया अम्बेडकर तक, और नीचे चला गया अब्दुल कलाम आजाद तक. अब कहां जाएगा? That will require one more prime ministerial term, right? एक बार और फिर अगले बात बुक बदल जाएगी तो बदल सकता है. So that is their content, and the medium of instruction must be in local languages. Who will say so? Orientalist, because they are interested in educating the masses. Angelicists will say, why do we need to educate them in local language, local tradition, local culture? We want to create those who can help us in administration. So they must be taught which language? English. They must be taught a curriculum which is largely based in English curriculum, so that there is easier operability and they can help in administration. There is no role for Indian education anyways, because it is useless. Because Western education is superior, both in content, being objective, it is more scientific, objective, etc. Western education must be promoted. Medium of instruction must be English language. That is what is being said by the Angelicists. So the Orientalists are saying that the content of the education must be largely regional. They are not saying no to Western advancements. They are saying that yes, Western developments in physical sciences, say in physical sciences, must be incorporated, but that does not mean that you do not teach them about their own culture, tradition. And you should use Western developments in physical sciences must be incorporated, but the content of education must be largely regional in nature, and also the medium of instruction must be in what? Local languages. Is that point clear? What is Angelicist saying? सब फालतू बात है, क्या करना है हमको? The content must be in English language. The content must be English or Western education, sorry. and Western curriculum should be followed. Why? Because Western modes of learning are superior to the local modes. Macaulay said that a shelf of Western text is a bookshelf full of Western texts is both philosophical and scientific, is more than the total worth of all Indian books put together in terms of quality. So he's saying that our ways of learning are far superior, right? So there is a clear racial bent here. Also he's saying that the medium of instruction must be in finally, in whose direction the debate gets settled? What do you think? The analysis, right? The debate ultimately gets focused in, or ultimately who is going to be the winner? And this is why, because Macaulay is who? Governor General. Governor General जो बोलेगा वही होगा. Ultimately debate तो हो गई बहुत. अब the time is to put this in use. The analysts are the ones who are emerging, the more powerful camp, and they basically put their ideas in operation. And it is this analysis viewpoint which guided British education policy to begin with. If this analysis viewpoint is guiding British education policy to begin with, what do you see? This explains partly the failure of what? Education in India. This partly explains the failure of education in India, that they never really focused upon education, right? And their objective is also not to universalize mass education. The content is also such that they are not focusing on educating the masses. Is that point clear? Right? So, if this is much is there, then you need to focus on something else now. Now, ultimately, it is how much money are they allocating? 1 lakh rupees. Is 1 lakh rupees sufficient? It's grossly insufficient. But Macaulay's commission, it is Macaulay who's recommending the analysis viewpoint, and it gets into force. 1830s onwards, it is getting into force. Now, 1830s onwards, this is being put into force. Now, what is happening is that over the next 2 decades, this is what is guiding the education policy. So, there are going to be no major advancements in education. Okay. Then, it is under Woods, Charles Wood, that the next major change comes in education policy, and this is called as the Woods Dispatch. Woods is arguing morally from the viewpoint of Orientalists, and he talks about universalizing primary education. Yes, these all things are there in the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So, he is talking about universalizing primary education, saying that primary education must be universalized. Then he is saying that अरे ये Woods Macaulay साहब का जो downward filtration theory है, it is a failure, because education is actually not filtering down. More than 2 decades of Macaulay's ideas being put into force, there is no downward filtration happening. So, downward filtration is a failure. So, what should be done? The state must take over the responsibility of the state must spend more on educating the masses. And he is saying that universalization of primary education must happen. And अगर आपको universalize करना है तो आपको क्या करना होगा? You have to give education in the local language. You have to give education in the local language. I did not know from KG1 to 6th class that I can speak English. I studied in a top-notch school. हम तो हिंदी में ही बात करते घर में, तो हम तो स्कूल में जाके अंग्रेजी, घर में हिंदी, तो आइडेंटिटी क्राइसिस, ना हिंदी पूरी आई ना अंग्रेजी, राइट? सो दैट इज देयर. वी आर पुटिंग आवर स्टूडेंट्स थ्रू अ सिस्टम. या तो फिर आप घर पे अंग्रेजी बोल लीजिए, वो हमारे माँ बाप को भी नहीं आती थी तो उन्होंने बोली नहीं, तो हम घर में हिंदी बोलते थे, स्कूल में अंग्रेजी, और ना अंग्रेजी ढंग से बोल पाए ना कभी हिंदी. So this is, we fell through the cracks. So next generation, if you were teaching your children English, which obviously you will do, talk to them घर में भी. I have no clue. अरे बेसिकली ट्रांसफॉर्मेशनल ग्रामर, अगर आप इसमें भी घुसेंगे तो ट्रांसफॉर्मेशनल ग्रामर इज अ कॉन्सेप्ट गिवन बाय नॉम चॉम्स्की. Chomsky, being a linguist, has tried to study this in considerable detail. Doctors have no clue about it. The only scientifically proven fact is the earlier you pick up languages, the faster you pick them up. You want to run German, the better age is 6 rather than 25. Why? That we don't know. The more languages you get exposed to at an earlier age, it's better to pick them up. That is also true, provided you want to pick them up. And the better is the education and the linguistic efficiency of your parents, the better is the correlation with children. Okay, so that is there. वो सारी चीजें हैं. It is actually an advantage that Indians have had in that way, that they get exposed to multiple languages at an early stage, and that is helping them pick them up. That is why we also picked up very quickly, is because of this reason, that you get exposed to multiple languages at an early stage. You think, the assumption is you can learn languages by, how do people pick up languages is a very intensely debated idea as to how do we actually learn language. There's no much clarity. आपके एग्जाम में वैसे भी कोई नहीं पूछेगा, वापस आ जाइए, इधर उधर नहीं जाना है. मैंने भी एक बार पढ़ने की कोशिश करी थी, एक लिमिट के बाद मेरे को समझ में आना बंद हो गया, छोड़ दिया. So डाउनवर्ड फिल्ट्रेशन इतनी बड़ी बुक है, वो सिर्फ यही कोशिश कर रहे हैं उसमें समझने की हाउ डू पीपल पिक अप लैंग्वेजेस, डू एनिमल्स हैव लैंग्वेजेस, व्हाट कॉन्स्टिट्यूट्स अ लैंग्वेज. तो वो पढ़ने के लिए आपको चॉम्स्की के लेवल का होना पड़ेगा, उतना नहीं है हमारा. So downward filtration is a failure. And what is Charles Wood saying? That in return for all of this, Charles Wood is saying what should be done, that if you want to educate the masses, it must be done in the primary or in the local language, and higher education can continue in English. Also he is saying कि भाई थोड़ा सा पढ़ाई तो कराए लेकिन स्किल्स भी देना है, तो वोकेशनल एजुकेशन must also be focused upon. तो सारी अच्छी बातें वो करके गए. And that is why Wood's ideas is called as the Magna Carta. Magna Carta is what is considered a major breakthrough, a revolutionary and a liberatory. I'll give you time to ask questions. To basically considered a major change. However, though the Wood's dispatch talked everything right, implementation never happened. Why? कि सिर्फ बात करने से नहीं होता, there must be funds. Funds were always lacking. Funds were little to implement this big agenda. Modi ji saying universalize health in India, Ayushman Bharat. If the money follows that path, then we'll see whether it happens. If there's no money in the project, however ambitious and noble the goal may be, it may or may not be, it is most likely not to be achieved if you're not putting the money in there. So that is why that's there. Now, it is here one more point that you need to know about the Wood's dispatch. Is one more point, that it is Charles Wood is coming in 1853. That is when this is coming. In 1857, just around and after the revolt of 1857. In this period, basically a number of new universities are being set up. Some of the earliest universities in Madras, in Calcutta, in Bombay are being set up. In Madras, in Calcutta, in Bombay. मद्रास, कैलकाटा, बॉम्बे. तो ये चार्ल्स वुड के बारे में आपको पता होना चाहिए. इसके अलावा ये दोनों तो आपको पता होना चाहिए. इसके अलावा आई हैव गिवन अ फ्यू मोर डिटेल्स अबाउट द हंटर कमीशन. 30 years later after this, in 1883 is coming हंटर कमीशन. एक दो पॉइंट है बस दिया हुआ है मैंने, वो पढ़ लीजिएगा. ठीक है. दैट कम्स इन 1883. हंटर कमीशन कुछ नई बात नहीं कह रहा है. हंटर कमीशन इज ओनली सेइंग फोकस ऑन दिस vocational education, because people must be given skills. Education must give employable skills. So focus on vocational education. That is what Hunter Commission is saying in 1883. अब जो नेक्स्ट पॉइंट बता रहा हूं उस पे सीधा सीधा क्वेश्चन आ सकता है प्रीलिम्स में. इन सब पे आ सकता है क्वेश्चन. स्पेशली वुड्स डिस्पैच, दे कैन आस्क यू अ क्वेश्चन. ओके. और they can ask you a question on the next thing that we're talking about is the Universities Act of 1904 based on the Rayleigh Commission's recommendation. ये समझने में बिल्कुल दिक्कत नहीं होगी. This is the last point here, and then we move to administrative structure, charter acts, all those things. Okay. Rayleigh Commission and the Indian Universities Act of 1904. What does this act say and why was it introduced? ये आपको पता होना चाहिए. Because they'll give a सीधा question with respect to the Rayleigh Commission, which of the following statements are true. This act was introduced in 1904. Just remember, 1904 is what is happening, partition of Bengal. So basically the idea was, एक line में universities were turning anti-national. That what is happening is that the British thought that educated Indians will serve as mascots, but educated Indians were arguing that the ideas of democracy which were applied to the West, they must also be applied in India, and Indians must be treated fairly and equally. Just like the same ideas that Western education talks about are applied in Europe, they must be applied to India as well. And the partition of Bengal was opposed by Indians. Some of these initial protests broke out where? In universities. And it was these protests which were breaking out in universities. Who is not happy with this? Curzon. Lord Curzon is the Governor General, the Viceroy at this time. And Curzon is not happy. So Curzon says these universities are becoming den of what? Sedition. है ना? तो universities, if they have performed their job truly, तो आपके माँ बाप के हिसाब से अगर यूनिवर्सिटी चलने लगे तो यूनिवर्सिटीज की तो कोई जरूरत ही नहीं है. क्योंकि मेरे माँ बाप तो यही कहते थे, दैट पढ़ो, नेतागिरी मत करो. सो पढ़ने भेजा आप तुम्हें कि. सो देन आई स्टॉप लिसनिंग टू माई पेरेंट्स. You should not do that. Then my parents realized that I have stopped listening, so they stopped telling. So now my parents only ask me, are you safe? That is there. So when my parents see my Facebook page, they tell me, please don't come home, we'll come to Delhi to see you. So Rayleigh Commission, basically in the Universities Act of 1904, The Rayleigh Commission is saying what? That these universities are becoming den of sedition, so we should do something about universities. What is being done about universities here is to reduce the number of, बड़ी सिंपल सी बात है, यूनिवर्सिटीज की सीट काट दो, यूनिवर्सिटी का फंड काट दो, यूनिवर्सिटीज अपने आप चुप हो जाएंगी. If you will have less number of people, less funds, less things for education, the Rayleigh Commission did not say that we are aiming to reduce and curtail higher education in India. They rather said something जो आप आजकल बहुत सुन रहे होंगे, increase the quality of education in India. That to improve the quality of education in India, something needs to be done of education, and precisely they focused on higher education in India. Something needs to be done. You need to establish institutions of eminence. So that is there. Now basically, how do you improve the quality of higher education in India? They said that, देखिए प्रॉब्लम क्या है, क्वालिटी की बहुत ज्यादा प्रोड्यूस हो रहे हैं लोग, एज इफ इंडिया हैड सम अमेजिंग लेवल्स ऑफ हायर एजुकेशन. तो इन्होंने बोला ये लोग ज्यादा हो रहे हैं प्रोड्यूस हायर एजुकेशन में, एंड द क्वालिटी इज नॉट दैट गुड, वी शुड इंप्रूव क्वालिटी. इफ यू वांट टू इंप्रूव क्वालिटी, यू शुड हैव मोर स्टूडेंट्स और लेस स्टूडेंट्स? Less students. So decrease the number of scholarships, decrease the number of colleges, granted affiliation to universities, and decrease the number of seats. You can do the opposite thing also, increase the number of colleges, increase the number of seats, and increase the number of teachers. पर नहीं, उल्टा, right? So that is there. So decrease the number of scholarships, colleges, seats, and professors. ये सब प्रॉब्लम है, इन सबको कम कर दो, quality will improve. So this was something that is not seen. The Rayleigh Commission's recommendation, Rayleigh Commission's appointed by Lord Curzon. What is the Congress reaction to this? The Congress criticized the Rayleigh Commission recommendation, and Gopal Krishna Gokhale argued that the Rayleigh Commission is a retrograde commission. Is a retrograde step. This is a step which is best avoided. Since 2014, after the BJP government came to power in 2014, you know, Indian higher education budget has seen a fund cut of 20%. When we have a demographic dividend, you have a dividend which is demographic only but is uneducated. You are cutting your funds on higher education. Institutions of eminence are emerging day and night, right? On top of that, you have institutions like JNU, which got no seats in 2015. 2014, BJP government came, 2015, no seats. 2016, seats cut to less than half. Because too much anti-nationalism in JNU. So, चलिए कोई बात नहीं, ये हमारे लिए बहुत है, right? So this can be asked in your prelims examination. That is all that you need to know about education policy. ये खत्म नहीं होता है, इसके बाद गांधी के भी व्यूज हैं एजुकेशन पे ऐसे तो, लेकिन हमारे लिए इतना बहुत है. वर्धा स्कीम ऑफ गांधी ने एजुकेशन, दैट इज देयर. मैं थोड़ा सा आपको बाद में बता दूंगा, ओके, लेटर. इज दिस मच क्लियर? लेट्स टॉक अबाउट नेक्स्ट थिंग, एंड दैट इज एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव स्ट्रक्चर. ये जानना curiosity के लिए, I also was pretty interested at a certain time to exactly understand how are the British establishing their ruling structure and administrative structure in India. Now this is fairly complex, okay. We are going to simplify it and only focus on the core essentials. This is the last topic for today, and इसके बाद next class में thankfully will not have to discuss so many facts in one go. History is not facts. History has to be more than that. Otherwise, history is boring, like today's class. So, Einstein was once asked, I have told you this joke. Told, huh? तो कोई बात नहीं, बाद में चलिए. First thing about administrative structure. Of the British in India. Now first focus on exactly how did the British rule India. To understand that, we are first talking about two acts here. The Regulating Act of 1773 and that then replaced later, a decade later, by the Pitt's India Act of 1884. देखिए 63 में तो ब्रिटिश आर एस्टैब्लिशिंग 63-64 ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी एस्टैब्लिशिंग इट्स होल्ड वेयर इन हैदराबाद एंड बंगाल. तो अभी पहला सिंपल सा इशू कि भाई हाउ आर यू गोइंग टू एडमिनिस्टर ऑल एरियाज इंक्लूडिंग बंगाल, हैदराबाद, एंड दे हैड द पोर्ट सिटी ऑफ बॉम्बे ऑल्सो इन कंट्रोल. ओके, so how will you administer all these areas? What do you do? They said ki firstly East India Company is in charge. Okay, East India Company is in charge, लेकिन ये East India Company को the government wanted to regulate. Why? Because it is a cash cow now. East India Company has managed to capture significant areas, and it must not take any stupid actions that ultimately brings about its downfall in the region and ultimately the British presence in the region. देखिए बड़ी सिंपल है, कैसे हो सकता है ये? ऐसे हो सकता है that East India Company officials were indulging in mass corruption. सबको लगा कि अभी ये मौका लूट लो, including Robert Clive. Robert Clive has amassed huge wealth. Okay, and these people were getting jagirs, abusing private trade, दुनिया भर का काम सब चल रहा है. Okay, it is at this time that the government says that these people will eat out the East India Company only, and this is exactly what happens. East India Company runs into loss. इसके और भी reasons हैं. I told you right that they are to buy goods from Lancashire producers and sell at loss. तो वहाँ से भी loss हो रहा है, officials भी खा रहे हैं, सब खा रहे हैं, तो East India Company is in loss. It is on the verge of bankruptcy. It takes a loan of 1 million from the British Crown. British Crown बोलता है लोन चाहिए तो रेगुलेशन होगा, and with that regulation came the 1773 Act. ये तो मैंने आपको बस इतना बैकग्राउंड इसलिए बताया जानने के लिए कि भाई why is regulation coming, who is and why the government is regulating the activities of a private company which is the East India Company. ठीक है, ये बस बैकग्राउंड आपको पता होना चाहिए. कोई पूछेगा नहीं आपसे, लेकिन एकदम से आप पूछे कि कैसे आ गया सर, ये है वो कॉन्टेक्स्ट. Okay, the financial bankruptcy of the East India Company drove them towards taking a loan from the British government. The government said, you want loan, we will give regulation and loan. Okay, this is the 1773 regulation. अब बस इतना समझ लीजिए that in India there was provinces of Bengal, in Madras as well as in the Bombay city, in Calcutta. तो उन्होंने बोला कि देखिए सबसे पहले तो क्या है कि all these are independent, but all these are not reporting to each other, they will report directly. इन सब में क्या है कि गवर्नर, and they all these are going to be appointed by whom? By the board of director. The board of directors will appoint the governors. All these governors will respond to the board of directors. These board of directors are of whom? East India Company. This East India Company's board of directors is based in London. And with the new act coming in, they said that this board of directors must report to whom? The British Parliament. They must report to the British Parliament. Why? because it is, they must give all regular reports of what are the activities they are planning, what revenue they are collecting, etc. from the region to the British Parliament, because the taxpayers' money is on the basis of which they've been given the loan. So the British Parliament must be reported. Now board of director is now basically, so what is happening in the 1773 Act, they're telling the board of directors to what? They're telling the board of directors to report. Okay, to whom? The British Parliament. इसके पहले ये नहीं था कभी. It is only introduced in 1773. The board of directors is not very interested in reporting. Why should we report? You have taken a loan, so we'll pay back the loan. Why should we allow interference, British government's interference? All the appointments were being made by board of directors, etc. Okay, so they are not very keen on reporting. What do? They delay reporting. Event happened 6 months ago, they are reporting now. Event happened, they are not reporting only. Delay and misreporting of facts was happening. The British government realized this is not how it's gonna work. So the Regulating Act of 1773 was not working. That is why they introduced Its India Act. Abhi, basically what then they did was ki we need to do something also. They said ki under the Regulating Act, they said ki what needs to be done is that one needs to be made a head, and Calcutta or basically the Bengal presidency was made the head, and other provinces were to report to the Bengal, and all regions में governor थे. There were governors in all the regions, but they said that from now on Bengal and Madras would report on matters of foreign policy, etc. Some restricted matters to whom? To the governor of Bengal, who would now be basically, this will move forward slowly to become the position of Governor General, who will basically becomes the eyes and ears in India. Abhi, but this is something that you must understand. Broad thing. अब ये समझिए कि यहाँ क्या हो रहा है कि प्रॉब्लम जो है इसका सॉल्व कर देते हैं. इन्होंने कहा कि ये बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर पार्लियामेंट को ढंग से तो रिपोर्ट कर नहीं रहा, सो वी शुड create another board above the board of director which will only monitor continuously, and this will be the board of control. That from now on a separate board will be established, the board of control. And ये आपको पता होना चाहिए that the Pitt's India Act is saying that we will differentiate and separate two important functions: the economic activities that can, private trading activities that can continue under the East India Company, and all other key appointments, administration and revenue collection, that will be overseen by whom? That would be overseen by the British government. Okay, the British government is appointing the board of control. This board of control will basically monitor all these key appointments, administration, revenue collection by whom? By appointing the Governor General. क्योंकि in 1773 Act, appointment of Governor General is under board of director. आप कुछ नहीं, we will appoint the Governor General. ये पॉइंट समझा? देखिए बड़ी सिंपल सी बात है कि ऐसे याद रख लीजिए कि if government is giving so much loan, wants to keep effective control, तो government will appoint, make the key appointments or not? बड़ी सिंपल सी बात, right? So government is saying that we'll make the key appointments through whom? बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल. देखिए किसी भी चीज को याद करने से पहले अगर आप समझेंगे नहीं तो ना तो याद रहेगी ना कोई रेलेवेंस समझ में आएगा. सो दैट इज व्हाई दे आर सेइंग दैट ऑल की अपॉइंटमेंट्स विल बी मेड बाय द गवर्नर जनरल, and this governor general will be appointed by whom? By the board of control. ठीक है, ये हुआ. अब अभी बात यहां खत्म नहीं हुई. उन्होंने बोला कि भाई ये बोर्ड ऑफ अभी इसमें और डिटेल्स में कहते थे आप कितनी डिटेल में चले जाइए. दैट फ्रॉम नाउ ऑन गवर्नर जनरल्स एग्जीक्यूटिव काउंसिल वुड हैव 3 मेंबर्स. अर्लियर इट हैड 4. उसका भी रीजन है, लेकिन आपको कोई जरूरत नहीं है. अगर आपको याद भी रखना है तो बस इतना याद रख लीजिए कि अर्लियर, देखिए अभी क्या है, हाउ विल गवर्नर जनरल मेक अ डिसीजन ऑफ व्हाट इज टू बी डन इन इंडिया. ही कैन नॉट मेक इट ऑन इट्स ओन. He has to make it in consultation with his council, which is the executive council. जैसे आप बोलते हैं कि प्राइम मिनिस्टर एंड कैबिनेट ऑफ मिनिस्टर होता है, वैसे ही यहाँ पे कोई प्राइम मिनिस्टर तो है नहीं, बट गवर्नर जनरल इज बेसिकली द वन इन चार्ज. सो द गवर्नर जनरल would have his executive council, which will be made of, earlier it was 4 members, and in 1784 it is reduced from 4 to 3 members. देखिए पहले 4 मेंबर हैं, तो गवर्नर जनरल के लिए is it easier to get a majority or not? If there are 4 members, तो 2 and 2, पहली बात तो वो हो सकता है, right? And even if he has support of 1 member, that will not be enough for getting a decision passed. So उन्होंने बोला कि 4 से 3 कर देते हैं, बस it will be already that the governor has a casting vote. एक तरीके से एक और मेंबर का सपोर्ट चाहिए, एक अपोज भी करेगा तो भी चल जाएगा, राइट? सो बेसिकली they reduce the number. इतना आपके लिए इसमें बहुत है. Now what is important to know is that the Pitt's India Regulating Act more or less remained in place with modifications when? Till 1857. Till 1857 the Pitt's India Regulating Act remained in force. ठीक है? Governor generals are getting appointed, board of control is appointed, board of control is making appointments to the governor general. बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल को हेड करने के लिए वन मोर पॉइंट दैट यू मस्ट नो इफ यू वांट, एंड दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट, इफ दैट दे वुड बी द सेक्रेटरी ऑफ, yes, ultimately basically when the Government of India Act 1858 comes, that is where you will see this in a major fashion, but the idea was given here. Okay, तो चलिए मत करिए कंफ्यूज, आप बस इतना ही याद रख लीजिए, कोई बात, सिंप्लीफाई जितना आप याद रख सकते हैं. दिस इज समथिंग दैट यू मस्ट फोकस अपॉन. This remains a structure till 1857 where it undergoes a major change with the Government of India Act 1858. वो क्या था वो हम बाद में पढ़ेंगे. Okay, because when we'll study 1857 then we'll see the impact is the introduction of Government of India Act 1858. पर अभी रुक जाइए, अभी कहीं नहीं जाना है, अभी चार्टर एक्ट्स और पढ़ के जाएंगे. Yes, any doubts still here? Act of settlement.
Amending Act of 1781 before 1780, like it is mentioned in Lakshmi Khan. So is it important to go in detail with that?
मुझे नहीं पता, आप देख लीजिए लक्ष्मीकांत में अगर दिया है तो. आई डोंट नो बिकॉज आई हैव नेवर रेड इट इन डिटेल.
It's in the Pitt's India Act 1784 की starting में ही there is an act of settlement 1781.
आई डोंट नो.
When there was no board of control and the governors were appointed by
Board of Directors, हाँ.
and then comes governor general directly, or do board of control appointed governors first?
See, Board of Control is appointing governors to different regions.
Yes.
In 1773. Okay, that is it. Now just focus on the next thing. ये important है और एक prelims के लिए, ये charter acts. Actually there were charter acts कुछ नहीं है, 2 मिनट का है, बस 2 मिनट. There's nothing here. Actually, just understand this. The British East India Company had a monopoly of doing trade in India. No other private trading company from Britain, was allowed to do trade in India. Only the British East India Company was the only private British trading company which was allowed to do trade in India. Meaning they had what? Monopoly. Not only with respect to French, obviously, but even within Britain, only they were the ones allowed to do trade with India, a trade which was hugely lucrative. So, what are other British traders going to say? That we also want trading rights in India. Why only the British East India Company must have the trading rights? If the army is protecting, if the British army is protecting British traders, then all other British traders must be allowed. Why only East India Company? So the British Parliament was under pressure to allow the entry of other British traders and end the monopoly of East India Company. Lekin the Parliament, if it is facing pressure to open up Indian market for other British traders, if the British traders were putting pressure on East India, on the British Parliament to open up Indian market for other British trader, East India Company is saying, aise kaise? How can we allow you to open it to other traders? Our margins will decline. Okay? And our share of the market will decline. We can't allow this. They are saying, please don't do this. Both sides are saying, please. How are they saying, please? By pleasing the British Parliament. How? By bribing them. So basically both sides are paying bribes. इसको sophisticated भाषा में कहा जाता है lobbying. Saying that one side is saying open it up, other side is saying no, don't open it up. Who's making money? British Parliament. Okay. The legislators were being bribed day in, day out, both sides, throwing money. कि it should be allowed or should not be allowed. देखिए बड़ी सिंपल सी बात है. Indian automobile sector will say lower custom duty. Will say do not lower custom duty. Do not allow Audi, BMW to sell their cars in India at low custom duty rates. Audi, BMW will say what? अरे ऐसे कैसे? Please lower the custom duty. Who will make money? Government नहीं. Parliamentarian. Okay. So lobbying इसे ही कहते हैं. ये sophisticated term है. इनके लिए हम bribing कह रहे हैं आज क्योंकि 200 साल हो गए इन्हें गए हुए और ये वैसे भी ब्रिटिश हैं, कुछ भी कह लो. Right. So basically in 1793 Act, it is actually, and इसका एक और रीजन है, बट ये मैं नहीं बता रहा हूँ क्योंकि इसका रीजन है नेपोलियन से, बट वो छोड़िए अभी, जब हम पढ़ेंगे कभी वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री तब बताऊंगा, इंटरेस्ट के लिए वैसे भी कोई जरूरी नहीं. इन 1793 बेसिकली द चार्टर एक्ट केम विच इज अ रॉयल फरमान एक तरीके का. ओके. एंड बेसिकली द चार्टर एक्ट सेड दैट वी विल रिव्यू द कंडीशंस ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ विच the East India Company is granted a trading presence in the region every 2 decades. तभी 1793, 1813, 1833, 1830, 1833 and then 53. 1793 में कहा अच्छा कोई बात नहीं, the British East India Company's trading monopoly would continue. The British East India Company's trading monopoly would continue in where? In India. Okay. In 1813 they said, time's up. 2 decades later they said, time is up. No further trading monopoly for the East India Company. Open it up to other British traders also. The monopoly of East India Company would be withdrawn except what? Except trade in tea and trade with China. ये क्या हो रहा था चाइना से ट्रेड? ओपियम. ओके, कोई बात नहीं, वो अलग है, बट अभी ज़्यादा नहीं था ओपियम, So yeah, basically this trade is happening with China in opium. आपको पता होना चाहिए वैसे ओपियम वॉर जब हम पढ़े वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री में पढ़ेंगे तो बता दो. Okay, so that is something which is there. Tea, why? Because tea was one of the most valuable commodities that East India Company was sending from the region. Okay, China and India were one of the biggest producers of the tea in the world. Okay, so that is why they wanted to keep the monopoly on tea. So British government said, okay, you can still have monopoly of buying and selling tea. In the whole world, there was only one British company which was buying and selling tea, and that is the East India Company. 1833 में ultimately the monopoly is withdrawn completely, including what? Including the trade in tea and trade with China. बचा क्या? बचा क्या? कुछ तो बचा. I have already told you, in 1853 the most valuable monopoly of East India Company is taken away. That they held on to the last. What was that? Appointment of civil servants in India. In 1853, I told you already, that appointment of civil services in India is thrown open to a competitive exam. Ending whose monopoly? East India Company's monopoly in appointing its officials. रुक जाइए. 1813, I told you 1 lakh rupees is being given by the Charter Act for the purpose of education. रुक जाइए. 1833, one more thing, useless fact. Governor General is becoming the Governor General of India. Governor General जो पहले ही बन गए थे, he is now being termed as the Governor General of India, because earlier it is only the provinces of Bombay, Madras who is reporting to the Governor General. Now he is saying कि नहीं बस, the Governor General is now responsible for the whole country. फोटो खींचने से कुछ नहीं होगा, लिखना चाहिए आपको. Okay. So that is there. So these many facts you need to remember. इसमें ज़्यादा कोई doubt का scope नहीं. Thank you.